So today we're going to continue on with exercise 213, which we'll pick up where we left off. But as I said 2 lectures ago, I'm always going to start from the beginning so you see me do the whole process yet again. Though for most of you, you've already drawn the sides, so you'll continue on with the sides that you've already drawn. Do recognize that if your terrain starts to get too complicated, for your assignment 202, it's going to be harder and harder to build. So if you feel like suddenly this is getting too much, go back, get a simpler site, and work from that. I won't grade you down because you picked a simpler site. I probably will be more lenient when it comes to other things like craft and whatever if it's harder to make in the first place. So I try to even things out if I can. But if it's a really hard site, really steep, you're going to have a little bit more time building it. So I'm going to work all the way through just like we did before. So way back when we opened up SketchUp, and I'll open that up for me as well. And in SketchUp, I go to File, Geolocation, Add Location. And at this point, I'm going to search for my particular site. So if it was Hawaii, I would go to Hawaii. And we'll zoom out a bit. I would pick some place that was of interest to me. Then once I got the actual bit of ground, I'd click on the Select Region to be able to snip the region. When I click Grab, it will then drop that piece of terrain into my site. If I want to see it in SketchUp, I'll have to go to File, Geolocation, Show Terrain, and then I'd see the terrain. Obviously, there's not a whole lot going on here, so that might not have been the best example. I have my other example, which is what I'll use going forward today. When I'm done in SketchUp, I do have to go to File and then Save As, and make sure that I pick a SketchUp 2013 version. With SketchUp 2013 version, I'll give it a name and I'll click Save, and that will then be my SketchUp file. Remember, of course, if we had a real survey, we would build this from the real survey rather than from our SketchUp file. But since we don't, we're just picking an arbitrary piece of land from SketchUp. And it's a good place to get the terrain to begin with. So now that I'm back in Rhino, obviously I have to make sure that my units match up with my SketchUp units. My SketchUp units were in inches. My Rhino units are also in inches. At that point, I can go to the File menu and then choose Import, not Insert, Import, which actually brings the terrain all the way in. I'll pick my SketchUp file. If you're not seeing the SketchUp file here, you may have restricted so that you're only seeing, say, Rhino files instead of all compatible file types. We'll make sure that it's still all compatible, and then I'll pick the Hawaii topography. And I'll go ahead and click on Open. At this point, I get the SketchUp import options. The default options are all just fine. And I'll go ahead and say OK at that point. So once this mesh comes in, let me switch into my shaded mode so that we can see it a little bit better. And there, I don't need this flat plane anymore, so I'll go ahead and delete it. And I now need to convert this mesh into a nice NURBS surface. And we're going to do that using the contour command. I mentioned other ways of doing it last class, using the patch, for example. But I don't think the end result is quite as good. So I'm going to continue using the contour command here. And the contour command is accessed either by typing contour or going to curve from objects, and then contour. Before I do the actual contour, though, I'm going to go to my layers and clean them up a bit. So under layer 0 here, that's the layer that has the SketchUp terrain on it. So I'm going to rename that, maybe, to be SketchUp terrain. And we'll get rid of these other layers because we don't need them. And I'm going to rename the default layer to be Contour X. And we'll make that the active layer. And then I'll go ahead and contour. So I'll go to my contour, which is curve from objects, contour. Or I can actually type in contour. My objects for the contour is the terrain. I'll hit Enter. We'll start at this corner. I need to turn on my vertex snap to be able to hit the corner. And we're going to go off in the X direction here. My distance between the contours I'm going to set at 100 feet. And there's my first set of contours. I will then repeat the process, remembering to select the surface, or the mesh in this case. I'll right-click to repeat contour, start at this point, and go off in the Y direction. Now, I probably should have made a separate layer for contour Y, so let's go ahead and do that. Y. We'll make that active, and then I'll go ahead and go to contour. Same base point right there, going off in space that way. 100 feet again, and there we go. Now I can turn off my SketchUp terrain, and I can see the wireframe that I essentially built for my terrain. And I will look at that in the top view and do a little cleanup. So we'll trim to there, there, and to there. So I'll go ahead and type trim. And we'll get rid of all that. We'll get rid of that. Get rid of this. There we go. And the last piece right there as well. So now I have a nice, clean, finished edge that I can do my network surface or curved network from. Before I do that, though, I want to make sure that I save this. So I'll go to File, Save, and this would be exercise 213 this time. Again, you guys are probably using the same file for all of this, but it can't hurt for me to go through the whole process yet again. So there's exercise 213. We'll go ahead and save. And now that I have this put together, we're going to do the curved network, which if I type in the command is network surface. If I access it from the menu, it would be under surface and then curved network. Assuming that I have no ragged edges and it's nicely contained, I'll go ahead and get the A, B, C, and D sides. And I can go ahead and say OK here as well. And of course, this takes a little bit of time to process. Yeah? It would say, failed to recognize the network. Would you like to select your curves manually? Or failed to sort curves, something like that. But it'll throw an error and if you have ragged edges. And when it's done, we'll get the dark, massive, highly accurate surface. So we need to select it and then rebuild it. And I will rebuild at 100 by 100. Which is usually my default. Remember that you can adjust this rebuild to smooth out the surface a little bit more, depending on how smooth you want the surface to be. Now that I have that done, I'm going to move that onto its own layer, and we will call that terrain. Let me go ahead and change the object layer. We'll make that current, and we'll turn off these two. And so now it's a matter of setting up for the actual physical model. And so just like with exercise 212, on the bottom of your exercise 213 handout, I have that same nifty little chart. And so, like I said, you guys have probably already done this, but I'm repeating myself. So now it's a matter of deciding what the appropriate scale is for your ultimate model. And so we're going to be building it at 11 by 17. And I'm letting you choose the scale, so it's up to you. I'm going to do my model at 1 to 200 here, which gives me an overall 11 by 17 size of 1,100 feet by, or excuse me, 2,200 feet by 3,400 feet. So I'll jump back into my model here, and I'm going to draw a rectangle that is at 3,400 feet, comma, 2,200 feet. Don't forget the at sign. There it is. With that rectangle, I need to align it over the top of my terrain here. So let's go ahead and move. And let me drop that over the top of my terrain. And where it's placed is really a matter of personal preference and what part of the terrain you want to catch. In this case, I'm catching the valley, sorry. And so now that I have that, I'll take the rectangle and I'm going to project it in the top view. Remember, the projection always has to occur in the top view down onto my surface. And so I'll go ahead and type project. If, by the way, you don't convert your surface using the curved network into a mesh or into a NURBS surface, if you don't convert the SketchUp mesh into a NURBS surface, the project won't work. So you may have encountered that before. I'll go ahead and hit enter. And now I have that nice curve that goes right on my surface all the way around. We can go ahead and trim the surface with that curve. And I'll get rid of the excess part of the surface there. So now I have my surface. I need a new layer. And we're going to call this layer Contour Z. Maybe not. Sorry, I have to finish the trim. There we go. Contour Z. And I'm just going to move this down in the layer stack so it's at the bottom. There we go. Contour Z is currently the active layer. And I'm going to go ahead and contour this surface. But I need to know what my contour interval is going to be. And that contour interval is going to be based on the physical material that I'm going to make the model out of. And so you guys are all going to use the bookstore cardboard, assuming I need to double check that they have it. But it's just standard cardboard. It's a little bit thicker than 1/8 of an inch. And because we're also padding for a little bit of glue, we're going to go ahead and call it 5/32 of an inch in total thickness. Therefore, at 1 to 200, if I come over here, my 5/32 is going to be 31.25 feet in contour. So when I do contour, I'm going to start by typing contour. It's going to be this surface. I'll hit enter. And it's going to be 31.25 feet. But before I can type that in, I have to say that it's going in the Z direction. So I'll pick my same corner, but I'm going to use the front view here to say it's going straight up and down. There it is. And my distance is going to be 31.250 feet. And I'll go ahead and hit enter. And when I do that, it's going to slice up this piece of surface in consecutive thicknesses of cardboard that I'm going to then be able to assemble. So we can go ahead and turn off the terrain now. And we're down to having just the contours. So from here, I asked you guys to go ahead and start drawing the sides, or the steps for the sides. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. And we'll call this side 1. Oops. Side 1, I'll make it the active layer. And I'm going to make it red so that it's a little bit easier to see. And there were two different methods for doing this. The first method, we'll do it on this side here, involved creating points. And I'm going to use the multiple points option here, which is to right-click on the point button. To create points going up the side, I do want to make sure that endpoint is checked. I'm going to uncheck point and vertex so that it's easy to get to the points of all these. I'm not going to go all the way up the side either. And now that I have those points, I'll select those points. I'm going to type SELPT to select the points so that I don't have to actually select them. Then I'll use Rotate 3D. And I will rotate from being vertical to being horizontal. Turn on my point snap, and then go ahead and draw the steps. I should turn on perpendicular as well. Good, it already is. And we can go ahead and work our way through. Etc. When I'm done, I'll take all of those again, and I'll rotate 3D. We'll start at the same point here. We'll go off in space and fold that back up in line with my model. So there it is. on that edge. The other option was to use the C-plane to change the drawing plane from being horizontal in world top to being even with the edge of my model. And to me, this is the option that makes more sense. It's faster once you get used to it. It's a little bit more difficult to understand when we first start out. So in order for you guys to see this a little bit better, I'm going to adjust my grid. And I'll do that by going to Tools and then Options, clicking on Grid. And I'm going to say the grid count at 2000 with minor grid lines every 12 inches, major grid lines every 10 inches. We'll go ahead and say, or every 10 feet. There we go. So there's my typical drawing plane, and I'm going to convert it so that it's up, standing up and down for me. So we'll go ahead and go to this little flyout menu next to Perspective, and I'm going to go to Set C-plane, and I'll go to 3 points. We'll click on the starting point there, go off in space along the x-axis, but this time instead of the y, I want it to go up in the z. So we'll go straight up in the front view here. And when I've done that, we can see that my drawing plane is now going up and down. At this point, I can then go ahead and draw right on the side from here. And we'll work our way up. And then back down this side. And so it saves all the 3D rotate options. Oops, I made a mistake on that one. It didn't quite snap to the end. There we go. And we can keep working our way down. Assuming that I do it correctly, we should be able to verify in the right side and front view that my steps are all vertical and that they're horizontal. That's part of why I like seeing them in red, is because it's easy to see, oh yes, all my steps look correct in this view. Similarly, in the front view, I could look at these steps and say, do they look correct? Yes, they do look correct. And so you'll have two sets that you'll see in both views. If you're getting ones that are on diagonals, something went wrong. Remember, when we go back from C-plane, if we're going to change our C-plane, always go to Set C-plane World Top first. That resets everything, and then do a new C-plane. So don't try to go from custom C-plane to custom C-plane. You'll end up getting yourself more confused. So always go back to World Top when in doubt. So obviously, it would take me a while to do all of these steps. So lo and behold, through the magic of computers, we will jump ahead into the version where the steps are already done for me. Excellent. So all I did was I finished the sides all the way along. And what I asked you to do last class was to get close to having all of the sides done. And at that point, then we have to pay a little bit more attention to what's happening in the confusing parts. And so, for example, if we look down here in the valley, I have this one little tiny contour. Technically speaking, there should be another line that goes down here, over, and then back up. But if I think about building this in the physical model scale, that little scoop is virtually nothing when I go to try to glue it together. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that little piece. Okay? And you may find similar little pieces that do the same kinds of things. Don't be afraid to just do a little bit of editing. So any valley, when we get to the bottom of a valley, this contour is the same contour coming around there and there. We need to go down, over, and back up. At the top of a hill, for example, we come up to this point, we just go straight across, and then we go back down. And if you start to look at this in its three-dimensional form, you can see why. So the steps have to be consistent. You should never be going straight across multiple times. Right? It should be just one and then either up or down. There's a valley. It should go down and back up. If you happen to make a mistake during part of it, I should have left one where I made a mistake. You, in all likelihood, will need to explode. If I did the explode and I clicked off, suddenly I'd have to go through and select all the pieces again, which is annoying. So when you do that, and you go to explode. Deselect using control the part that's wrong. Type join again. And then these pieces remain connected together, and you've only gotten rid of the one piece that's incorrect. It'll save you a few steps. I'm going to go ahead and join those back together as well. So at this point, we've made our way around, but I've left the corners undone for now. And so we need to actually, here's a good example. So by the time I laser cut this little piece, it's either going to burn up in the laser cutter or I'm going to lose it. So we should just get rid of that piece altogether. So I'll go ahead and press the delete key. Then I need to get rid of this step. So let's go ahead and explode. I'll deselect those two pieces and then join to keep the rest of it together. Then we can get rid of these two pieces. So now let's start to look at the corners. So in this case, on this corner, we have a step that comes down, the corner continues over, and on this one, we didn't quite make it to the corner. So this is all one level of cardboard. We just need to connect a line that goes from this corner. I'll just do it off into space like that. And this line needs to then intersect that line. So I could do an extend, or remember back to that fillet command where I set the radius of the fillet to be 0. So radius 0 on a fillet, and then this piece can connect to that piece. Makes it a little bit easier than having to do an extend or a trim. But it's just another option. So now that that's done, we'll take a look at it. There, this is meeting very nicely at a corner. This piece and this piece should be joined together, and that should be a separate piece. Oh, there's another really thin little piece that's going to get burned up. So let's go ahead and explode. I'm going to deselect there, there, there. I'll hit, and then let me join. Those pieces are still together. Now I can get rid of these extra pieces. Get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Let me take this piece, and I want it to connect to that piece. I'll do the fillet again from there to there. Oh, it's not going to let me do it. We'll do an extend instead. Actually, you know what? Let me just draw it. There we go. Take less time. And we'll go ahead and join that back together. And now I have that piece of the curve. So we come to this corner, and this starts to get a little touchy. So from here, we go up a step from this level to that level. So I need to come straight across to represent this level, and then this one needs to come down and meet it. So we'll do a line that goes off in space this direction. But if I'm going to draw this line, I need to reset my C-plane so that I can draw that again. So we'll go to my little cursor here. I'll go to Set C-plane, and we're going to do 3 points. And we'll go to there and to there. Once I have the X, or once I have the steps, it's really easy to set the C-plane to the steps because I have the origin of the C-plane. I have the X direction and the new Y direction already established for me. So now I need to go down by my contour interval. So this was 31.250 feet. There it is. And I need to come off so that those two pieces intersect. And they should intersect at a point. We'll go ahead and we'll use fillet again to connect that to that. I could also trim it. That would be another way of doing it. So let's reset the C-plane. Set C-plane, world top. And now we can see how that corner comes together right there. So we'll work our way around to this corner and look at what's happening here. Okay, so in this case, we get to a little corner piece. This needs to go down, over, over, and back up. So I'll reset my C-plane. Set C-plane, 3 points. It's vertical. We'll go from there, negative 31.25 feet. We go, I didn't have to type negative. And we'll go off in space. We'll go from there down 31.25 feet, there. And now I'm going to connect from that end using my perpendicular snap to right there. And we'll go ahead and trim like that. So I do need to make sure that these are connected to that curve, and those are connected to that curve. So I'm typing join. I forgot to do that over here. Let's make sure that this are joined, and that this are joined as well. Oop, looks like I need that piece too. All right, perfect. So that corner is now done, meeting nicely. And now we'll deal with this upper corner in the back. I'm going to leave my C-plane the way it is because chances are I'm going to need it again. And we will draw from this point straight off. And from this point, we have to go down. So it would be 31.25 feet down. And I need to come over and meet that line there. So that meets nicely. We'll go ahead and trim. And we'll get rid of that piece as well. Let's go ahead and join these two together. And we'll join those two together. And now I've worked my way around the entire drawing. Let me set the C-plane back to world top. And I've worked my way around the entire drawing. And all of my corners are nicely resolved. Now it's a matter of working through and creating the sides that I'm ultimately going to be using. And I haven't done any scaling yet. We're going to do the scaling all at once down the road. And so when I start to think about a side, I'm going to draw a line that comes down from each of these, and it just has to be below wherever this line would be. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line. We'll start right there at that point. And I need it to go straight down. So I could switch the C-plane, or I could just switch my view and draw it in this view. It has to be lower than that point. So we want to go down a little bit lower. And how deep it is really is arbitrary. It doesn't matter, because we're just cutting out the model. So once I have that point drawn, I'll come across like this, leave it a little bit long, and I'll go from there down to that point there. So let's do a quick little trim on that longer piece. There we go. We'll join this together. And let's go ahead and join it with, oops, this plus this plus this. We'll join. And now you're seeing one side of my model. So once I have the one side done, we can continue with the other sides. We're going to have duplicate corners, or duplicate edges on the corners. I'm just going to copy to there and there. We'll go off in this direction. We'll go from this corner straight down, snapping to perpendicular right there. We'll go ahead and trim. Enter to finish. This plus this plus this then become the next side. There they are. Continuing along here, we'll go from that point down, leave it long, and we'll go from this point down and meet it perpendicular. Then I'll type trim. We'll get rid of that piece, and then this plus this, all right, perfect, plus that. We'll go ahead and join. One last piece on this side. This one's actually pretty easy because we can do it all in one. You can start there, down, over, and back up like that. Now I can take this plus that, and we'll join that as well. So essentially, we're starting to see this as if it were a 3D model. We haven't shrunk it to the right size yet, but we're seeing all the component pieces. So now that I have those component pieces, let's go ahead and rotate 3D these pieces so that they fold flat. And the key here is that we just want to be consistent. If we take the pieces and fold them all out, that's fine. If we take the pieces and fold them all in, that's fine. They just all have to be in or all have to be out, because when we go to cut them, we need it one way or the other. To me, it always makes more sense to fold them out. So I'm going to use rotate 3D. and we will rotate that out. We'll take this piece. We'll rotate that out. We'll take this piece and rotate that out. And the last piece here, and fold that one out. So if we were looking at this in the top view, we're starting to get the component pieces that we need for this model. The next and or last piece, I'm going to go ahead and move these away from my model a little bit. There they are. Is I need all of the contours flat on the ground to cut out. So I'm going to do another layer. Well, no, we'll leave them on the side layer for now. Let me create a surface. And it can be just corner to corner. Like that. That's larger than my model as a whole. I'll switch to the top view. And in the top view, I'm going to take, let me get rid of those points. SEL, PT, and then delete to get rid of those points. I'm going to project all of those lines onto this surface here. I'll go ahead and hit Enter. And I'll get a projection of all those lines flat. Before I deselect anything, I'm going to go ahead and move those lines away. So we can go ahead and delete that plane. Now I have my lines that are my contours, except for that point. That's a little weird. Look, that never got joined. Take that one. Put it there. There we go. My mistake. So now I have the contours that I'm going to cut out. I have the sides established. So those are both pieces that I need. So before I get too far, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my contour Z. And now I'm going to start to work with the sides and the contours that I've created. So at this point, I need to start to scale it down so that it's in its scaled version that I'm going to laser cut. So I'll go ahead and take all of those objects. And remember, I turned everything else off. I'm down to just the sides. And at this point, it might not be a bad idea to do a save as so that you could go back if something went wrong to the full scale version, the unscaled down version. So I'll do I'll save this file, and then I'll go to File, Save As, and we're going to call this Exercise 213, and then I'm going to add an underscore laser cut, just so that I know this is the laser cut file. And we'll go ahead and click Save. OK, so now I know that this from there to there is 17 inches, or I want it to be 17 inches. And from here to here, I want it to be 11 inches. So I'll go ahead and do a scale. Notice I did select both the topo lines and the sides. And I'll do a regular scale. I'll specify my origin point right there. I want, instead of a scale factor, I want a reference point. So I want to know from there to there, I want that to become 17 inches. And I'll do the little quotation mark for inches and press Enter. And it disappears. That's because it's so small compared to the 3,400 feet. So before I do anything else, I'll type Z, Enter, and then S for selected because it's still selected, Enter, and there it is. It's just a lot smaller. So now this is at the scale of the model that I'm going to make, not the scale of the terrain. So we'll go ahead and we'll start to prep this for laser cut. Let me go ahead and create a new layer, and I'm going to call this layer laser cut. And I'm going to create a new sublayer for cut and a new sublayer for engrave. The cut layer needs to be red, and the engrave layer needs to be blue. If you use red and blue, those are the colors that we need for laser cut. We don't have to type in any color values. They happen to be correct already. So I have a cut layer and I have an engrave layer. Cutting is red, engraving is blue. So I need to start prepping this. I need two versions of the terrain here. But before I do that, let me go ahead and draw a rectangle around the outside of my terrain. Because obviously, if I'm going to cut it out, I need something that goes all the way around the outside. So there's a border, so to speak, that's going to cut out. And we'll go ahead and we'll move all of these objects onto the cut layer. But ultimately, I don't want all of the objects to be cut. I want to select every other object. So I'm going to pick a low point. Let's call it this one as my low point. And starting there, I'm going to work my way up and select every other line. And there's not really an easy way of doing this. You just have to work your way up the terrain, making sure that you've selected every other line. So I'm holding down Shift as I'm doing it. And this is one of those things your eyes can start to go crazy after a while of trying to figure out which ones are which. But you get better at it. And so as I work my way up until I'm at the end here, sometimes I have to move over and say, wait, that continues. Sometimes I have to come back and say, well, wait, this one continues going down. And then this continues and then this one continues like that. So now I have all of those selected, and I'm going to move those lines onto the engrave layer. So we'll go to Change Object Layer, like that. And if I deselect, we now have a red and blue combination. The blues are going to engrave, the reds are going to cut. I need to take this and make a copy of it. So I'll type copy. Come on. Maybe not. And create a second copy. There we go. And this second copy, I need to have the opposite. So it's a little bit annoying because it's like, well, wait a minute, I have to select the opposite. So we're going to go ahead and start on one or the other of them and pick it. Looks like I missed that should be on the engrave layer. So let me come back up here. See, it's always possible to miss. Let's go ahead and make this on the engrave layer. So I'm going to go ahead and change object layer. Now that's blue. So if I were doing this to save a little bit of effort and time here, I'd go ahead and select the whole thing. I'd go back to the cut layer, and I'd say change object layer. Now everything's back on the cut layer. And then remember, I started, my first one was right there. I'm going to start this time with the next one up. So there it is. I'll hold down Shift, and I'll start working my way up the same way again. Don't we wish? OK, so now I've got those. Oh, I made a mistake there. That should have been blue. So you can start to see that there are errors as part of this. Hold on a second. And I'll go ahead and I'll switch this to be on the engrave layer. Change object layer. And it now should be like that. And when I look at these two, we could look at them in the top view. I should be able to make sure that any object on any of these pages should be the opposite of each other. I made a mistake there. This one should be blue because that is a continuation of this contour. This one should be red. Change object layer. There we go. Likewise, this one here should be blue. So sometimes afterward, you have to go back and kind of double check to make sure. But essentially, it should always be the opposite of whatever you picked. So in this case, that should have been blue, and that should have been blue. So we'll go ahead and change those to engrave. And that should be the opposite of up here. That's red. So you can always reference across each other. So we have these two being opposites of each other. If you have extraordinarily steep terrain, this is in rare circumstances. Hopefully, it won't be something that you're dealing with here. Sometimes creating a third and doing every third contour gives you a stack of 3 pieces of cardboard. You get a little bit wider. It's easier to glue them together. So sometimes with really steep terrain, it's worth doing a third or even a fourth in this process. Generally, you can get by with just 2. And obviously, it saves material when you do just 2. So now I have these 2 pieces that I'm going to cut out. Notice the border on both is red because it has to be cut out. These are all red, but I want to move them onto the cut layer so that it's clean. Change object layer. There we go. So now I need 2 rectangles that represent the laser cutter bed. So let's go ahead and draw a couple rectangles. I'm going to say at 24 inches, 12 inches. Remember, we're at model scale now. I'll take this. Let's copy it. And for these, I might need 3. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and I'll move it onto the first one. You don't want your laser cut to go right to the border. If you've done any laser cutting, you know that it doesn't quite cut to the border, so you give yourself a little space. We'll move this one up and over as well. And then we need to fit these other pieces on the sheets as well. It's OK to rotate them, but you can't mirror them. So in that case, those 2 fit. Hopefully this will fit on the edge. Ooh, a little tight. We might be able to make it work. Hold on a second. So they're a little tight there, but that one will work. This one needs to come over, and that one will fit a little bit better. So there we go. I have all the pieces that I need, and it'll fit on just 3 sheets, which is good. So at the bookstore, I would buy 2 of the larger sheets, cut them down, and you can get 4 sheets for the laser cutter out of, or 2 sheets out of each sheet that you buy at the bookstore. So I'm going to end up needing 2 sheets. I've got those pieces ready. Now it's a matter of exporting these to AutoCAD. And so if I select them so that they're selected, I'll go to File and then Export Selected, which leaves behind all that other stuff that I have on turned off layers. And we're going to change the Save As type to be AutoCAD Drawing.dwg. And we'll call this Exercise 213 to Laser Cut. And I'll go ahead and click Save. It will ask me 2004 polylines. That's fine. If you want to do 2004 lines, that's OK too. I tend to keep it in polylines to try to keep all the lines as continuous pieces. And we'll go ahead and say OK. And it then creates the AutoCAD file for me. That's the file that I'll take next door to the laser cutter room and actually do the laser cutting. I do have to check with Daniel and Chi to see when it's officially being staffed. It should be staffed before you guys have to cut so that you can go over, make an appointment, and they can help you do the setup on the laser cut. How many people have laser cut before? Okay, most of you have laser cut before. You probably feel fairly confident in that part of it. If you're not, if you've never done it before, tag up with somebody who's comfortable with it or find one of the technicians to help you through it. I've never had a problem since we started having technicians with anybody laser cutting. That part tends to be pretty easy. So I have my AutoCAD file. There's one last piece of the puzzle, and that is in the AutoCAD file itself. Rhino has no way of setting up the line weights for you. So if I go to my files from today, and I go to that AutoCAD file, hold on, I have to figure out where I put it. Not there. See, I should have paid more attention to where I saved the file. Well, this is last year's. That'll work. If I double-click and open the AutoCAD file, there's just one step that I have to do, and that is to adjust the line weights. By the way, if you ever export from Rhino and you try to open the file in AutoCAD, Autodesk loves to tell you, you didn't create it using AutoCAD. It's like, yeah, that's fine. So there's my files. There are my cutouts. And I'm going to go ahead and right up here in the center, there should be a button for Layer Properties. I'll click on that. And I want to make sure under the line weight section that they're all 0.00. If I click on it, I can choose 0.00. It will, generally speaking, it will say default originally, and we just want to click on it and turn it to 0.00. You can technically do that on the machines in the laser cutter room, though if you spend too much time on those machines, people get cranky. It's like, you should be cutting. So it would be nice if you open the file first and change it to 0.00 there as well. That's the line weight you need for AutoCAD. So once you're done, you'll have that laser cut file. I do want you to post today a JPEG version of this file. I don't care about the AutoCAD itself. So when you get to, this stage, go to your little triangle, go to Capture to File, and save a JPEG version of this. That's something that you will post today. As part of your assignment 202, due next Wednesday on the 15th, you need to post your AutoCAD file so that it's ready to cut. And I used to never have you make the AutoCAD file post, just turn in the final version. But what happened is people would like, oh yeah, I can do that later, I can do that later. And then it would come up to the deadline of laser cutting, and they wouldn't have spent the time making the appointment and working with the people, and there'd be this big rush. By making the digital file, the one that you're going to cut, due 2 weeks before the actual model's due, you're all done. You all have 2 weeks to figure out when you have time to go cut it. So it's no big push at the end, which is the idea. Do, of course, leave yourself some time to actually make the physical model. Right? The laser cutting part's easy, but you still need maybe an hour to glue it together. If you try to do it in the hour before it's due on the day of class, the glue won't have dried, and it will fall apart when you hand it to me. Hint, hint. Give it a little bit of time to dry. Okay? You're more than welcome to work on the tables and back. If you're going to do any cutting, and usually it does take a little bit of X-Acto work when you actually put it together. If you're going to do any of that kind of stuff, you need to do it on the back table on one of those cutting mats. Oh, and just remember, there's one other piece of this. So these sides are exactly the dimensions of the 11 by 17. Well, the cardboard has a thickness to it. And so if we were going to glue these 4 sides together, when we butt the joints together, we'd gain distance. So we need to take off 5/32 of an inch on 2 of these pieces. And so I'll pick the 2 short pieces for right now. And let me come in here, and I need to draw over. So we'll start there. We'll come over 5/32 inches. And we'll go across to right there. I'm going to trim off that excess piece in just a second. We'll start right here. We'll go up 5/32 inches. There. And I need to do the same thing on this piece. So we'll go down 5/32 inches. Glad I remembered that. And we'll go 5/32 inches. Right, like that. I can go in and I could do a trim, but it really doesn't matter because the laser cutter is going to cut it there anyway. But just for cleanliness purposes, I could go through and clean those edges. And that's just so that when I glue the pieces together, they'll actually go together. So I've done those pieces. I need to re-export this file, obviously, and then I'll save it. For today, don't worry about the AutoCAD file. I say to post it, the AutoCAD file. I don't care about it. Post the JPEG of this colored version. It's easier for me to check that you did it than to open all the AutoCAD files. So hopefully that starts to gel together of this whole process of where we're going. Next class on Monday, we're going to move away from topography. We're going to get into building skyscrapers and back into rendering and stuff like that. So this is the last day of doing this process. If you've followed along and you've gotten there, chances are you'll be done and ready with your AutoCAD file. At least that's the hope. Don't just rely on your exercise 213 post. You do have to make a separate DWG post for your assignment that says clearly assignment 202, AutoCAD file, etc. The featured image is the JPEG image that you're creating too. Any global questions? Yeah. Exactly. And then you don't have to worry about it. Exactly. Fingers crossed. That's the idea.